I was never a superstitious man. I always believed in logic, in what could be proven and explained. Ghost stories were nothing more than tales to scare children, creations of restless minds seeking meaning in the unknown. However, there are things that defy reason, events that refuse to fit into the comfortable logic of the real world. Something like that happened to me, and to this day, I don't know how to explain it. It all started when I moved into a small apartment in the city center. The building was old. Its walls bore the weight of years, and the hallways had a faint, musty smell, as if they stored memories forgotten by time. But the price was irresistible, and I, skeptical as I was, didn't care about legends or superstitions about old buildings. The first few days went by smoothly. The place was quiet, the neighbors kept their distance, and the view from the bedroom window, though limited by other buildings, allowed the city lights to seep into the room at night. However, something had bothered me from the start: the bathroom mirror. It was large, old, framed in dark, worn metal, as if it had endured decades of use. Every time I passed by it, I felt an inexplicable chill, an uncomfortable impression that something was not right. At first I ignored it. It was just a mirror, a common object, nothing special. But then I started noticing little things. Wrong reflections, shadows that shouldn't be there, a subtle movement in the glass when I was sure I was standing still. One night, while brushing my teeth, a shiver ran down my spine. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something different. A dark figure, motionless, standing behind me. I quickly turned around, but the bathroom was empty. I looked back at the mirror, and there was nothing but my own reflection. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the appearances became more frequent. Sometimes I saw the figure in the turned-off television. Other times in the reflection of my phone screen when the ambient light was low. It was always the same figure, a dark, observing presence. At first, it disappeared the moment I looked directly at it, but then it started lingering a few seconds longer, as if it knew I was aware of its existence. One night, the feeling of being watched became unbearable. I decided to cover all the mirrors in the apartment with sheets, convinced that if there were no reflections, there would be no presence. For a few nights, this seemed to work. Until I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange sensation, a suffocating weight on my chest. The room was dark, only the pale streetlight filtered through the window. My eyes took time to adjust, but then I noticed, in the glass of the window, there was a reflection. The man was there. This time, he didn't disappear immediately. I froze, unable to breathe, as his silhouette became clearer. He was tall, thin, and his face. There were no eyes, only black voids where they should have been. His mouth, distorted into an impossible grin, seemed to widen as I tried to move. My body wouldn't respond. The reflection raised a hand and touched the glass, and at that very moment, a sound came from inside the room, a low scratching noise coming from the darkness. The bedside lamp flickered for an instant. When I finally gathered the strength to move, I jumped out of bed and turned on all the lights. The room was empty, but the window pane now bore finger marks, elongated imprints that weren't mine. The next day, I packed my things and left. I never returned to that apartment. I never told anyone this story because I know how it sounds. But sometimes, when I pass by a reflective surface, I feel that something is still there, just waiting for the right moment to return. Time passed, and although I tried to forget, I never stopped feeling that it was still following me. I avoided mirrors, windows, and anything that could reflect my image. However, paranoia wasn't enough to protect me. One rainy night, alone in my new apartment, I felt that presence again. The window glass vibrated slightly, as if something was touching it from the other side. I tried to ignore it, but the fear was overwhelming. I gathered my courage and approached. The rain lashed against the city, and lightning illuminated the sky intermittently. It was in one of those flashes that I saw him again. He was no longer still. He was closer. His face, now more defined, displayed a grotesque expression. And then something happened that made my blood run cold. He smiled, but not a human smile. It was something monstrous, sharp teeth appearing in a mouth far too wide for a normal face. I tried to step back, but my feet were stuck to the floor. A low guttural sound echoed through the apartment. The glass shattered. I don't remember exactly what happened next. I woke up on the floor with shallow cuts on my face and arms. The window was intact, with no sign that anything had broken. But inside the room, something had changed. The mirror I had covered with a sheet was now uncovered, and on its fogged-up surface, words were scrawled with invisible fingers. There is nowhere to run. Since then, I haven't slept. I live surrounded by light, avoiding any reflective surface. But I know that won't stop him. He is still there, watching, waiting. And I know that when I least expect it, he will cross through the glass once again. When my wife and I found that house, it felt like a dream come true. Located in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by tall trees and with a spacious backyard, it was exactly what we needed to start a new chapter in our lives. It was old, but well preserved, with a charm that modern houses lacked. I fell in love with the spacious porch, and my wife adored the colorful stained glass windows in the living room. The price was incredibly low, but the realtor explained that the house had been vacant for years. No one wanted to commit to the necessary renovations. In the first few days, everything went well. We unpacked our belongings, painted some walls, and arranged the furniture. During the day, the sunlight softly filtered through the stained glass, projecting vibrant colors on the walls, giving the place an almost magical feel. But at night, the atmosphere changed. On the third night, I was awakened by a strange noise, a dry creak coming from downstairs. I turned to my wife, who was sleeping soundly beside me. The noise repeated, followed by a dragging sound, as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor. Believing it to be just the old house settling, I ignored it and went back to sleep. The next day, I noticed that one of the stained glass windows in the living room was cracked. I was sure it had been like that before. Over the week, we started noticing other small things. Doors closing on their own, shadows in the corners of our peripheral vision, faint whispers that seemed to come from the walls when everything was silent. On the sixth night, my wife woke me up terrified. "There's something downstairs," she whispered, clutching my arm. The sound of scratching on the wooden floor echoed down the hallway. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly made my way down. The air felt colder than usual. As I illuminated the living room, my eyes stopped on the large leather armchair near the fireplace. It had been moved. Someone or something had dragged it a few inches. A chill ran down my spine. The next morning, we decided to check the attic. something we hadn't done since moving in. The hatch was stuck, as if it hadn't been opened in years. When we finally forced it open, we found nothing but dust and old boxes. But in the back, something caught our attention. An old mirror covered by a filthy sheet. As I removed the cloth, I saw my reflection, but with one disturbing detail. My reflection was smiling. And I wasn't. I froze, unable to move. My wife, noticing my expression, looked into the mirror and let out a choked scream. "Let's get out of here," she said, pulling my hand. The next day, we called a local historian. He told us that the house once belonged to an eccentric sculptor who mysteriously disappeared decades ago. It was said that he created perfect images of himself, but one day something went wrong. His body was never found. But the strangest part was that he was obsessed with mirrors, believing they were portals to other realities. That night, as we finished packing our things to leave, a low, distorted laugh came from the attic. My heart nearly stopped. Without looking back, we ran out of the house and never returned. Weeks later, I received a call from the realtor. He said the house was back on the market, but the new buyer had reported something strange. When they went to check the attic, they found no mirror, just an old portrait of a man identical to me. Since then, I have tried to move on with my life, but the unease persists. Every night before bed, I avoid looking into any mirror for too long. The irrational fear that something might smile back at me still haunts me. Since I was a child, I always had trouble adapting to new places. With every move, it felt like a part of me stayed behind, trapped within the walls of the previous house, like a forgotten echo. But that house was different. We moved to the countryside after my mother got a job as a teacher in a small town. My father had passed away a few years ago, and since then, it was just the two of us. The house was old, with an unkempt garden and windows that creaked at the slightest wind. The price was surprisingly low, which should have been a warning sign. The first night was the worst. I slept in my room on the second floor, while my mother slept in the room next door. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of the wind howling outside. But around 3 in the morning, I woke up to a strange noise coming from downstairs. Footsteps. I froze, my entire body cold. They were slow, heavy, as if someone was wandering aimlessly through the house. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe it was my mother getting water in the kitchen. But then, I heard her bedroom door creak. My breathing became shallow. I heard no scream, no reaction, just the sound of footsteps returning down the hallway. And then, nothing. The silence returned as if it had never been broken. The next day, my mother looked strangely tired, pale. I asked if she had walked around the house at night, but she denied it. She gave a faint smile and said I must have been dreaming, but I knew it wasn't a dream. In the following days, the feeling that something was wrong only grew. Small details unsettled me. Doors we left closed appeared open, objects moved out of place, and a strange smell lingered in the air, a scent of damp earth and something else, something rotten. One night, after my mother had already gone to sleep, I went downstairs determined to find an explanation. The cold floor under my feet sent shivers through me, and the darkness felt thicker than usual. I grabbed a flashlight and walked into the living room. That's when I noticed something in the corner of the room. A hole in the wall. It was small, about the size of a soccer ball, revealing a dark space within the structure of the house. A strong smell wafted from it, making my skin crawl. I knew I should back away, but something compelled me to look closer. Trembling, I leaned in and pointed the flashlight inside. There was something there, something that gleamed slightly in the beam of light. An eye. It blinked, and before I could react, a bony hand shot out of the hole, trying to grab me. I let out a scream and fell backward, kicking at the air frantically. The hole remained silent for a few seconds before a low guttural sound echoed from within. I ran to my mother's room, shaking, trying to explain what I had seen, but she just hugged me and told me to forget, to pretend none of it had happened. Her face was tense, and something in her eyes made me realize she knew something I didn't. That night, she locked the bedroom door and we stayed together. But the footsteps returned, and this time they stopped right outside our door. We held each other, listening to the heavy breathing on the other side. When the sun rose, the footsteps were gone, but I knew they would come back. The next morning, I made an even worse discovery. I went to check the hole in the wall, hoping nothing had changed, but the hole was bigger, much bigger. It was as if something had been forcing its way through the house. There were marks on the floor, like claws scratching the wood, and the stench of decay was stronger than ever. My mother tried to remain calm, but I could tell she was scared too. "We are leaving today," she said, and I didn't question it. We packed only the essentials and left without looking back. As we got into the car, I had the feeling that something was watching us from the second floor window, something that had finally made its way through the hole. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, hoping I would never have to return to that place. We never found out what truly inhabited that house. We only know that we weren't the first to abandon it, and we probably won't be the last. I was never one to believe in superstitions or ghost stories. I always thought they were just made-up tales to scare children or entertain bored adults. That was until the day I went to my family's farmhouse alone. The farmhouse was an old property inherited from my grandfather. My parents rarely went there, so when I had the idea of spending a weekend alone to relax, they didn't question it. I wanted space and tranquility, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. I arrived at the farmhouse late Friday afternoon. The place was beautiful, but there was something eerily silent about it. No birds sang, no crickets chirped, just a soft wind rustling through the trees. The overcast sky made the atmosphere even darker. I entered the house, a small and rustic cabin, and started organizing my things. When I went to turn on the lights, I noticed the electricity was failing. The bulbs flickered as if something was wrong with the wiring. I ignored it, assuming it was due to the house being unused for so long. After a quick shower, I had a snack and sat down to read a book. The silence unsettled me, so I put on a playlist on my phone. But strangely, the music started glitching. I thought it was just bad internet, but when I checked the screen, I realized my phone had no signal. I had checked before leaving the city and knew there should have been at least some connection. Then I heard a noise outside, something like footsteps on the porch. I froze, listening closely. More steps, slow, heavy. My heart raced. I grabbed the flashlight and walked to the door, trying not to make a sound. When I shone the light onto the porch, there was nothing. No sign that anyone had been there. I shut the door and locked it. Maybe it was just an animal. I went back to my book, trying to ignore the feeling that something was off. I forced myself to sleep early, but my sleep was light and restless. In the middle of the night, I woke up with the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. I opened my eyes and saw something in the corner of the room, a dark silhouette standing near the window. My breath caught. I couldn't move. Time seemed frozen. The figure didn't move, but I could feel it watching me. On impulse, I turned on my phone's flashlight and pointed it toward the corner. Nothing. My heart pounded. I was sure something had been there. I got up from bed and went to the window. It was closed. Everything seemed normal, but deep inside I knew it wasn't. I couldn't sleep after that. I spent the rest of the night awake, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. In the morning, I stepped outside for some fresh air. The sunlight helped push away the irrational fear from the night before. That's when I saw the footprints. They surrounded the house, clear prints in the soft dirt, and they weren't mine. A chill ran down my spine. Who or what had been there? I decided to explore the property to see if I could find any signs of intrusion. I walked to the abandoned barn, which was just a few meters from the house. The door creaked at the slightest touch, revealing years of decay. I stepped inside cautiously, dust swirling in the beams of sunlight filtering through the wooden slats. Inside, a strange smell lingered in the air, a mix of damp earth and something rotten. In the corner, I saw something that made me step back. An old chair with ropes tied around the arms and legs, as if someone had been restrained there. I swallowed hard. Maybe it was just a relic of the farmhouse's past, something I wasn't aware of. But then I noticed the floor around the chair was clean. Someone had been there recently. A shiver ran down my spine, and I hurried out of the barn, locking the door behind me. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but something kept me there. I wanted to understand what was happening. On the second night, I decided to stay awake and keep watch. I sat in the living room, facing the window, with a flashlight and a knife beside me. Time passed slowly, and the silence was absolute. Around 2 a.m, I heard a low noise coming from the porch. A scratching sound, like nails dragging across the wood. My chest tightened. I grabbed the flashlight but hesitated before pointing it outside. The sound stopped. Seconds later, something hit the door. A dull thud, hard enough to make the air leave my lungs. My hand trembled as I raised the flashlight toward the door. The thud came again. I needed to get out of there. Summoning all my courage, I bolted for the car, fumbling to unlock it. Behind me, footsteps echoed across the porch. As I jumped inside and slammed the door shut, I looked in the rearview mirror. Something was there. A tall shadow standing at the edge of the porch, watching me. I floored the gas pedal, kicking up dirt as I sped away. I never went back to the farmhouse, and I never told my parents this story. But to this day, whenever I close my eyes, I still feel that presence watching me. I was never a fearful person. I was always a skeptic, the kind who looks for logical explanations for everything. But what happened to me in that apartment still haunts me to this day. After years of living with roommates, I finally got an apartment just for myself. It was small but cozy. Located on the 10th floor of an old building, it had a decent view of the city. The rent was below market price, and the landlord seemed eager to rent it out. In my excitement to have my own space, I ignored that detail. For the first few days, everything went well. It felt strange sleeping alone after so much time sharing a place, but I quickly got used to it. The problem started on the third night. I woke up suddenly, for no apparent reason. The room was engulfed in darkness, but I felt that something was wrong. Then I noticed the door to my closet was open. I was sure I had closed it before going to bed. I got up, still drowsy, closed the door, and went back to bed. I tried to ignore the chill running down my spine and forced myself to sleep again. The next day, I didn't think much about it. But it happened again the next night, and the next, and the next. I always closed the door before bed, and every night I woke up to find it open. I started getting paranoid. I even set up a camera in my room to record while I slept. When I watched the footage the next morning, my blood ran cold. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the closet door simply opened by itself. No sound, no interference. It just slowly slid open until it was fully ajar. The most disturbing part, there was nothing inside, but the recording captured something even worse. A few minutes after the door opened, my camera recorded my own image. Sitting up in bed, staring intently at the closet. I had no memory of waking up that night. Fear consumed me. I started avoiding my bedroom, sleeping on the couch for a few nights. But things got worse. Now I would wake up in the middle of the night to find objects out of place. The bathroom door open, drawers pulled out. One night, I heard whispers coming from my bedroom. When I gathered the courage to look, the room was empty, but the closet door was open as always. I decided to seek answers. I spoke with the building's caretaker, an elderly man who had worked there for over 20 years. When I mentioned my apartment, I saw his expression change. He told me that years ago, a man had lived in that apartment. He was a loner and had severe psychological issues. The neighbors rarely saw him, but sometimes they heard him talking to himself as if there was someone else there. One day, he simply vanished. No one was allowed inside the apartment for months until they finally decided to break down the door. He was inside, dead. But the most terrifying part? His body was found inside the closet. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I left without saying another word. That night I decided it would be my last in that apartment. I locked all the doors, left the lights on, and tried to stay awake. But sleep won over me. I woke up startled by a loud noise. Something had fallen inside the room. My heart pounded. I got up slowly, grabbing my phone to light up the room. The closet door was wide open, but that wasn't what made me freeze. Inside the closet, reflected in the mirror, was my own image, but it wasn't moving with me. It was like a delayed reflection, watching me. Paralyzed, I tried to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. I blinked several times, but the reflection remained out of sync. Then, slowly, it smiled. My eyes widened. I hadn't smiled. The room suddenly turned ice cold. A shiver ran down my spine as the reflection took a step forward, but I hadn't moved. It was as if that thing wanted to step out of the mirror. My body reacted before my mind did. I ran out of the room, grabbing my backpack with just the essentials. As I fled the apartment, I heard the sound of glass shattering, but I didn't look back. I rushed down the stairs, not waiting for the elevator. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. When I reached the lobby, the caretaker looked at me alarmed. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked in a hushed voice. I just nodded, unable to form a response. I left and never went back. Weeks later, I received a call from the landlord. He sounded nervous, asking why I had left without notice. I gave him a vague version of the story, expecting him to laugh or try to convince me it was all in my imagination. But there was a long silence on the other end of the line before he muttered, "So you saw it too." I hung up immediately. Since then, nightmares about that reflection still haunt me. I feel like somewhere that thing is still watching me, waiting for the right moment to appear again. I work as a sales representative, and I'm always on the road. Driving long distances has never been a problem for me. In fact, I enjoy the solitude, the freedom that comes with an empty highway and music playing in the background. But after what happened on one of my trips, I never saw driving at night the same way again. It was a Friday, and I was returning from a business trip. The journey was long, cutting through an isolated road in the countryside. I could have stopped at a hotel to rest, but I wanted to get home as soon as possible. The GPS showed I still had about 3 hours to go. The sky was dark, moonless, and only my headlights illuminated the deserted road. After a while, I realized I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. No headlights in the rearview mirror, no lights on the horizon. It was as if I was completely alone in the world. The silence was absolute. My car was the only sound in that vast emptiness. Then I saw something in the distance. A silhouette on the roadside. As I got closer, I saw that it was a woman standing by the edge of the road. She wore a long, light-colored dress that swayed gently with the wind. She didn't signal for a ride, nor did she turn as my headlights illuminated her. She just stood there, motionless. My stomach twisted. Something about her felt wrong. But trying to stay logical, I thought she might need help. I slowed down and looked at her more closely. Her feet were bare and covered in dirt. Her hair was long and dark, falling over her face. But what truly froze me was the realization that she had no shadow. My headlights shone directly at her, yet no shadow was cast on the ground. Fear took over me. Without thinking twice, I hit the gas. The car sped down the road, and when I glanced at the rearview mirror, the woman was still there, standing still, but now facing my direction. My breathing was uneven. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But a deep, unsettling feeling told me it wasn't just that. A few miles later, I started to calm down. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Further ahead, another figure stood by the roadside. The same light dress, the same long, dark hair covering the face. It was her again. My eyes widened. This was impossible. I had left that woman miles behind. But there she was, standing in the exact same way. I pressed the accelerator even harder, my heart pounding. I passed by her without looking directly, feeling sweat trickle down my neck. When I was far enough away, I glanced at the rearview mirror. She was now in the middle of the road, watching me. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. I could no longer pretend this was just a coincidence. Something was deeply wrong. I tried to ignore it, to keep my eyes on the road. But when I glanced at the passenger seat, I almost lost control of the car. She was sitting there, My scream caught in my throat. Her dress was dirty, her feet covered in soil, and her face was still hidden by her hair. I could feel her presence beside me, cold, unnatural. The car began to shake as I struggled to regain control. Every part of my body screamed for me not to look at her directly. But I did, and at that moment the car shut down. The headlights went out, the engine died, and everything around me plunged into total darkness. The car kept gliding along the road, but I couldn't see anything. Not the dashboard, not the road, not even my own hands. It was as if I had been thrown out of reality. Then a whisper. "Stop the car." Her voice wasn't loud, yet it filled the entire space around me. It was slow, raspy, as if she hadn't used her vocal cords in years. My body refused to obey. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was trapped there, unable to move. My only instinct was to slam my foot on the accelerator, even though I couldn't see a thing. The car roared back to life. The headlights flickered on, and the darkness vanished in the blink of an eye. The passenger seat was empty. I didn't think. I just kept driving as fast as I could. Time had lost all meaning. Every minute felt like an eternity, every mile an endless nightmare. The only thing I knew was that I had to get off that road. Finally, I saw the lights of a town in the distance. Relief flooded my chest. I kept driving until I reached the first gas station I could find. I pulled in, got out of the car, trembling, and rushed inside. The gas station attendant gave me a strange look. I must have looked pale, sweating, completely shaken. I approached the counter and, trying to steady my breathing, asked, "That road, is there something strange about it?" The man was silent for a moment, then sighed and shook his head. "You saw her, didn't you?" My mouth went dry. "The woman by the side of the road?" She appeared to me more than once. And then, she was inside my car. The attendant exchanged glances with another man sitting in the corner of the convenience store. The second man got up and walked over, lowering his voice as he asked, "Did she speak to you?" My stomach churned. I had a feeling that whatever the right answer was, I didn't want to know. "Yes," I whispered. "She told me to stop the car." The silence that followed was even more terrifying than everything I had just experienced. The man took a deep breath before murmuring, "You did the right thing by not stopping." I wanted to ask more, but I felt like I didn't need the answer. Something inside me already knew. I never took that road again. Never. And to this day, when I drive at night, I avoid looking at the roadside, because I'm afraid of what might be watching me from the darkness. The first time it happened, I thought it was just a nightmare, a bad dream like any other. But the second, the third, and the countless times that followed, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't just a dream. It always happens the same way. I wake up in the middle of the night, my body completely paralyzed. My eyes are open, but I can't move, I can't speak. I try to scream, but my voice is trapped somewhere between my mind and my throat. The room is the same as always. The half-open door, the furniture against the wall, the closed window. But there's something else there with me. I can feel it. At first it was just a hunch, an irrational fear that seemed to emerge from the void. But over time I began to realize that it wasn't just a feeling. There was something there, something moving in the darkness. The fourth or fifth time, I saw the shadow for the first time. In the corner of the room, something tall and twisted stood watching me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew I was being stared at. The figure didn't move right away. It just stood there, analyzing me, as if deciding something. The terror I felt was unbearable. I desperately tried to move a finger, anything to free myself from that torpor, but it was in vain. Then it moved. Slowly it came toward me, unhurried, as if savoring my terror. The closer it got, the heavier the weight on my chest felt, as if something was sucking the air from my lungs. When it reached the side of my bed, I could see its form more clearly. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its neck bent at an unnatural angle. The darkness seemed to wrap around it like a second skin. Then it leaned over me, its face, if it could be called that, hovering over mine. A hoarse, crackling voice escaped its invisible mouth. "You can't move, but I can." At that moment, I felt its thin, icy fingers touch my arm. A shiver ran down my spine, and the sheer need to escape jolted me awake. My lungs filled with air all at once, and I sat up in bed, sweating and trembling, but the terror didn't leave. Because when I slowly turned my head to the side, I saw the reflection in the bedroom mirror. The shadow was still there, and it was smiling. The next day, I started researching sleep paralysis. I read accounts of people who had experienced similar things: dark figures, presences in the room, the inability to move. Everything pointed to something scientific, explainable, a sleep disorder in which the mind wakes up, but the body does not follow. That explanation gave me some comfort, but not enough. What I saw didn't seem like just a hallucination. The paralysis began happening more frequently, 3, 4 times a week. I avoided sleeping, but exhaustion eventually won. And every night, when I opened my eyes, it was there. One night, something different happened. I woke up in the same paralyzed state, but this time, the figure wasn't in the corner of the room. It was on top of me, its freezing fingers pressing against my forehead. I could feel its breath, a stench of mold and rotting flesh filling my nose. And then, something new, words that seemed to be whispered directly into my mind. "Now you see me. Soon you will hear me. Then you will feel me." I wanted to scream, to thrash, but my body remained imprisoned in that suffocating darkness. Then, suddenly, I felt something slither beneath my skin. A sharp pain ran down my spine, as if something was rooting itself inside me. When I finally regained movement, I ran to the mirror. My reflection looked normal, but something inside me wasn't. I could feel it, crawling beneath my skin, whispering in my mind. It was no longer just in the corner of the room. It was inside me. The first time it happened, I thought I was just dreaming. I woke up in the middle of the night, lying on my back, my eyes wide open in the darkness of the room. My body wouldn't respond. I tried to move my fingers, turn my neck, but nothing. Only my eyes moved. My chest felt heavy, as if someone were sitting on it. Panic crept in slowly, turning into silent despair. My breathing was short, shaky. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but my voice was trapped inside me. That's when I felt it. I didn't see it right away, but I knew something was there. The presence was dense, suffocating. A strange smell filled the room, a mix of old dust and something rotten. My eyes struggled to see through the dimness. In the corner of the room, where the streetlight didn't reach, a silhouette began to form. It didn't move like something alive. It was slow, distorted, as if it were trying to understand its own shape. There was no face, just a dark void where eyes should have been, but I knew it was looking at me. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to believe it was just a nightmare, that at some point I would wake up for real and everything would disappear. But it didn't go away. Then came the whisper. Not a sound, but a thought that wasn't mine. Something cold crawled through my mind, a voice without an owner, pronouncing words I didn't understand, but I could feel them. Stay. A shiver ran down my spine. The shadow took a step forward. My entire body begged to react, to flee, but I was buried in the bed, a prisoner of my own fear. And then, as if it had had enough fun, it disappeared. My body was mine again. I gasped, pulling air in as if I had just emerged from underwater. Trembling, I sat up in bed and looked at the dark corner. Nothing. I spent the next day in a daze. I didn't sleep the following night, or the one after that. But eventually, exhaustion won. And then, it happened again. This time it wasn't just a presence, it was a real physical weight. Something climbed onto the bed with me. Cold breath brushed against my skin. And then, fingers, long, cold, wrong, touched my face. My own body refused to be mine. The nights became a battlefield. I resisted sleep. But when I gave in, the darkness swallowed me. Every night, the thing came closer, more intimate, as if it wanted something from me. And now, even when I'm awake, I still feel its gaze. I still hear its voice, telling me to stay. I never used to fear sleep. It was my escape, my solace after long days filled with the mundane struggles of life. But now, the thought of closing my eyes fills me with dread. Because when I sleep, I wake up. And when I wake up, I am not alone. The first time it happened, I chalked it up to exhaustion. I had been working late, drinking too much coffee, and staring at my laptop screen for hours. When I finally stumbled into bed, the weight of my own fatigue dragged me under like a stone sinking into deep water. Then, suddenly, I was awake again. Or at least, I thought I was. My eyes were open, my room dimly lit by the street lamp outside. Everything looked normal. The pile of clothes on the chair, the half-empty glass of water on the nightstand, the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. But something was wrong. I tried to sit up, but my body refused to obey. My arms, my legs, every part of me felt encased in cement. I opened my mouth to call out, but no sound came. Panic blossomed in my chest, my breathing quick and shallow. I had read about sleep paralysis before, but nothing had prepared me for the sheer terror of experiencing it firsthand. And then I felt it. The air in the room shifted, the temperature dropping as if an unseen door had been left ajar, letting in something cold. A presence, heavy and oppressive, settled over me. I couldn't see it, not at first, but I could feel it, watching, waiting. The shadows in the corner of the room deepened, thickened, until they peeled away from the wall and took shape. A figure emerged, impossibly tall and thin, its form barely distinguishable from the darkness that birthed it. I could make out no features, no eyes, and yet I knew it was staring directly at me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to thrash, to run, to do anything but lay there helpless as the thing moved closer. Its presence pressed against my chest, a weight that stole my breath, suffocated my thoughts. I swore I could hear it breathing. Slow, deliberate inhalations that seemed to rattle with an inhuman resonance. Then, it whispered. "You let me in." The words weren't spoken aloud. They slithered into my mind like fingers probing through the cracks of my consciousness. I felt invaded, violated in a way that went beyond physicality. My entire being recoiled from the words, but I couldn't shut them out. The figure leaned closer. My body screamed to move, to fight, but I remained a prisoner to my own flesh. And then, cold fingers traced along my jaw, sending ice through my veins. I don't remember how long it lasted. Maybe seconds, maybe hours. Time lost all meaning. But then, as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The pressure lifted, the shadows receded, and my body was mine again. I sat up gasping, lungs aching from the strain of forced stillness. It wasn't real, I told myself. Just a hallucination. Just my brain playing tricks on me. But then, it happened again. And again. And again. Each time the entity returned. Each time it came closer. It no longer lingered in the corner. It stood at the foot of my bed, then at my side, then hovering over me. Its whispers became clearer, more insistent. "You let me in." I stopped sleeping. Caffeine became my crutch, my lifeline. But exhaustion is a cruel master. No matter how hard I fought it, eventually my body would succumb. And every time I closed my eyes, I woke up again in that frozen nightmare. Then one night, something changed. I was paralyzed as usual, my breath shallow, my body motionless. The figure was there, its elongated fingers reaching toward my face. But this time, something inside me snapped. I willed every ounce of strength I had into my hand, my fingers, my wrist. The pain was excruciating, as if I were fighting against invisible chains. And then, I moved. Just a twitch, just the smallest shift of my fingers. But the figure recoiled. It hesitated. And then it spoke again. "Not yet." The room went silent. My body lurched back into motion, and I bolted upright, my skin slick with sweat. The shadows in the corner were just shadows again. I thought I had won. I thought maybe I had broken free. But the next night, before I fell asleep, I heard it again. A whisper right next to my ear. "Soon." I travel for work. Not the pleasant, touristy kind of travel, but the kind that forces me to sleep in cheap hotels, moving from one city to another, solving problems that are never really mine. Over time, you learn that all these places have something in common. The smell of old carpet, curtains that never close properly, and that unsettling silence in the middle of the night. That night, I was exhausted. I had spent the entire day in meetings, and all I wanted was to take a shower and sleep. The hotel I stayed at was on a quiet road with an outdated reception area and a single night employee, a middle-aged man who seemed too bored to even give me decent service. I went up to my room on the third floor. As soon as I entered, I noticed that characteristic smell of mold mixed with cheap cleaning products. I dropped my suitcase on the floor, went straight to the bathroom, and turned on the shower. That was when I noticed something strange. The mirror was fogged up, as if someone had just stepped out of the shower. I ran my hand over the cold surface and noticed that something had been written there, but the letters had already blurred too much for me to read them. My body shivered, but I forced myself to ignore it. Maybe it was just paranoia from being so tired. I took my shower, got dressed, and lay down. The room was too silent, an oppressive silence. I grabbed my phone to distract myself until my eyes started to get heavy. Just as sleep was about to take over, a faint sound woke me up. It was the sound of dripping water. I got up, irritated, thinking I had left the faucet slightly open. I walked to the bathroom, and to my surprise, the sink was dry, but the sound continued. I looked up and saw a small dark stain on the ceiling, from which a slow, rhythmic drop of water was falling. I decided to ignore it. I went back to bed and closed my eyes. Then I heard something that made my stomach turn. Footsteps, slow, dragging footsteps inside my room. My heart started pounding. I kept my eyes closed, convinced it was just my imagination. But then, a sound even worse than the footsteps echoed in the room. The bathroom door slammed shut. I sat up suddenly, my heart racing. The room was completely dark, but now I could hear breathing. It was coming from the bathroom. Something was in there. I fumbled along the wall for the light switch, and as soon as I turned it on, everything went silent again. The bathroom was empty, but on the mirror, written in trembling handwriting, a phrase paralyzed me. "You weren't supposed to be here." I left the room without grabbing my things. I stumbled down the stairs, my breath unsteady. When I reached the reception desk, I found the employee still sitting there, looking at a yellowed newspaper. He lifted his eyes to me, completely unbothered. "Something wrong, sir?" I wanted to scream, demand answers, but all I managed to say was, "There's someone in my room." He furrowed his brow as if he had heard this before. He put down the newspaper, sighed deeply, and without looking at me said, "This hotel used to be a hospital. There was a fire, many people died, but sometimes they come back. Most guests just ignore it. You can switch rooms if you'd like." I left without looking back. I grabbed my suitcase and drove all night, feeling like someone was still watching me through the rearview mirror. I have never been a superstitious person. I always thought that stories of haunted hotels were just urban legends to attract tourists or scare children. But after what I experienced that night, I began to believe that there are things we simply cannot explain. It all started when I had to travel for work to a small town in the countryside. Since the company covered all expenses, I booked a reasonably comfortable hotel, but nothing luxurious. I arrived late at night, exhausted after a long meeting. The night clerk, an elderly man, handed me the key to room 306 with a look that, at first glance, seemed just like fatigue, but later I realized it concealed something more. The hotel was old, with narrow hallways and worn-out carpet. The smell of old wood and dampness lingered in the air. As soon as I entered the room, I felt a strange cold, as if the environment was colder than the rest of the hotel. I ignored the feeling, attributing it to the air conditioning, and threw myself onto the bed, ready to pass out. In the middle of the night, something woke me up. At first, I thought it was the sound of the wind banging against the window, but soon I realized it was a different sound, a whisper, low, almost imperceptible, but constant. At first, I thought it was coming from the room next door, but as I fully woke up, I realized it was coming from inside my own room. The bedside lamp flickered for a second before turning off on its own. My heart started pounding. I couldn't see anything in the absolute darkness. I tried to turn it back on, but the switch was unresponsive. I grabbed my phone to use the flashlight, and that was when I felt it. Something on the edge of the bed. A weight, as if someone had sat there. I held my breath. My mind tried to find logical explanations for it. Maybe it was just the bed adjusting to my weight. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me due to exhaustion. But then came the smell. a strange, metallic odor. Blood. Panic took over me. I turned in bed slowly, and with the weak light from my phone, I saw something that still sends chills down my spine. There were bloody handprints on the sheet, right beside me. I jumped out of bed, trying to think, trying to convince myself that this was a mistake, a bad joke. But the room was empty. There was no sign of anyone. I looked at the door, which was still locked. I ran to the bathroom, washed my face, took deep breaths. I needed to get out of there. I quickly dressed, and as I opened the door to leave, I almost ran into the night clerk, who was standing in the hallway as if he had been waiting for me. His eyes showed no surprise, only a morbid resignation. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low, almost a lament. What happened in that room?" My voice trembled. The old man sighed and looked away for a second. "Many years ago, a woman stayed here. She was running from something, or someone. In that very bed where you slept, she was found dead, blood all over the mattress. The case was never solved. Some say she's still here, waiting for justice." A shiver ran down my spine. I walked past him without saying anything else and ran down the stairs. I checked out in a hurry, not caring that it was still early morning. I preferred to sleep in my car than spend another minute in that room. I never went back to that town. I can no longer sleep in hotels without remembering the feeling of that weight on the bed, those whispers in the dark. And to this day I wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't woken up in time? I have always loved traveling alone. The silence, the freedom to make my own itinerary, the chance to explore cities without rush. But after my last trip, I never booked a hotel again without researching its history first. It was a business trip to a small town in the countryside. I arrived at the hotel late at night after a tiring flight and a long car drive. The place was an old building with classic architecture, imposing yet clearly worn by time. The neon sign flickered intermittently, and the reception was empty when I walked in. After waiting a few minutes, a thin, pale man emerged from a side door. His uniform was impeccably clean, but his face bore a strange expression, a mix of curiosity and distrust. He greeted me formally and handed me the key to room 407, offering no additional information. I took my suitcase and headed for the elevator. The hallway on the 4th floor was long and silent, with thick carpeting that muffled my steps. The walls had faded floral wallpaper, and some doors looked like they hadn't been opened in years. My room was at the end of the corridor, and as I inserted the key into the lock, a shiver ran down my spine. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite place it. The room was simple but functional. There was a double bed, an old wardrobe, a small desk, and an oval mirror beside the bathroom door. The air was thick with the scent of mold and aged wood. I closed the heavy curtains, placed my suitcase beside the bed, and went to the bathroom to wash my face. That was when the first strange thing happened. As I lifted my head and looked into the mirror, I froze. For a brief moment, I was certain I saw a shadow standing behind me. I turned quickly, but the room was empty. My heart pounded. I tried to convince myself that it was just exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. I lay down and tried to sleep, but the hotel's silence was unnerving. There were no sounds of other guests, no footsteps in the hallway, nothing. Then, around 3 in the morning, I was startled awake by a sound, a low whisper coming from the corner of the room. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the sound came again. Faint, almost imperceptible, but definitely real. I turned on the bedside lamp and looked around. The room appeared exactly the same, but the wardrobe door was slightly ajar. I was sure I had closed it before going to sleep. Swallowing hard, I got up slowly and approached the wardrobe. With a swift motion, I pulled the door fully open. The inside was empty, just my jackets hanging. Yet the feeling that someone was there lingered. I decided I didn't want to stay there any longer. I started packing my things to go down to the reception and request another room, or if possible, leave the hotel entirely. But when I reached the door, it wouldn't open. The lock was stuck. I tried turning the key, but it wouldn't budge. I banged on the door, called for help, but the hotel remained eerily silent. My chest tightened with the suffocating sensation of being trapped. I grabbed my phone to call reception, but the call wouldn't go through. The signal was weak, almost non-existent. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the mirror beside the bathroom. I didn't want to look. Everything inside me screamed to ignore it and find another way out. But it was impossible. My eyes slowly drifted toward the mirror. In the reflection, something moved. It wasn't me. A dark shadow hovered in the corner of the room near the wardrobe. But when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. Yet in the mirror, the figure remained still, as if watching me. My fingers trembled as I grabbed a chair and hurled it at the mirror, shattering the glass into dozens of pieces on the floor. At that moment, the bedside lamp flickered violently, and a high-pitched noise filled the room, like a muffled scream coming from inside the walls. I needed to get out. I started pounding on the door with all my strength, kicking and pushing with my full weight. Suddenly, as if it had never been locked, the doorknob twisted on its own, and the door swung open. I bolted out, running down the hallway and dashing down the stairs. The reception remained empty. The bell on the counter produced no sound when I pressed it repeatedly. Then something caught my attention. The guest register book lay open on the counter, and my name was written inside. But the checkout date had already been filled in. For the day before. My blood ran cold. I hadn't been there for more than one night. And even if I had, why would my checkout have been recorded before I had even left? That's when I heard slow footsteps behind me. I turned around slowly, and there, at the far end of the lobby, standing in the darkness, was the shadow. No longer just an indistinct figure in the mirror. It was tall, with an elongated silhouette and deep, empty eyes. It didn't move, but I felt as if I were being pulled toward its presence. I didn't wait to find out what would happen. I ran out the front door, not caring about my suitcase or anything else. I only stopped when I was inside my car, the engine running, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the hotel seemed different. The windows were all dark, as if it were completely abandoned. The neon sign no longer flickered. It was as if the hotel had never been in operation. I drove nonstop until dawn. When I finally felt safe enough to stop at a gas station, I searched the hotel's name on my phone. It had been closed for over 10 years after a series of unexplained guest disappearances. One of them, according to reports, never checked out. I have been a truck driver for over 20 years. I've traveled across this country from end to end, seen things most people wouldn't believe. But nothing has ever marked me as deeply as what happened that night on the BR 163 highway. It was a cold August night. The clock on the dashboard read 2:47 a.m. when I stopped at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, near the border between Mato Grosso and Pará.
I was exhausted, my eyes heavy with sleep, but I had to keep going. I got out to refuel, stretched my legs, and ordered a strong black coffee. The gas station attendant, a thin man with a patchy beard, looked at me for a moment before asking where I was headed. "Santarem," I replied, blowing on the hot coffee. He frowned and scratched his chin. "You'd better get some rest before moving on. This road, at night, it's treacherous." I let out a short laugh, thinking he was referring to the robberies in the area. "I'm used to it, friend. This is just part of the job." He slowly shook his head, as if he knew something I didn't. But he didn't insist. I finished my coffee, paid, and climbed back into the cab. As soon as I shifted gears, the radio crackled, and a hoarse voice whispered something I couldn't understand. I changed the frequency, thinking it was just interference, and continued my journey. The first few miles were uneventful. The asphalt was damp from the low fog, and the tall trees cast dark shadows over the road. I turned on the radio to stay awake, but the static persisted. Every few minutes, a faint, distorted voice would break through the noise. I felt a chill run down my spine. Then I saw something on the roadside. A woman, dressed in a stained white gown, stood on the shoulder. Her long hair covered her face, and her arms hung limply at her sides in an unnatural way. There shouldn't have been anyone there, not at that hour. I slowed down. She lifted her head, and even from inside the truck, I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. Her eyes were dark, empty. She didn't blink. I stepped on the gas. When I checked the rearview mirror, she was gone. My fingers were sweating on the steering wheel. The radio crackled again, and this time I could make out a single word. "Turn back." My chest tightened. The road seemed darker, narrower. I tried to focus, but my mind kept replaying the image of that woman. Then I felt it. Something inside the cab. The passenger seat sank slightly, as if someone had just sat down. My heart pounded. Slowly I turned my head and saw what I had feared most. The woman was there, staring at me. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded several meters before stopping on the shoulder. My chest rose and fell rapidly, my heart hammering against my ribs. But when I looked again, nothing. Just the empty seat. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. I started the engine and prepared to move on, but before I could shift gears, I saw something in the rearview mirror. Behind the truck, on the deserted road, a trail of wet footprints slowly led into the forest. I floored the accelerator like never before. I drove non-stop until dawn, only pulling over when I reached the next town. Since that night, I have never traveled that road alone again. And every time I pass by, I keep my eyes wide open, because I know she's still there, waiting. In the following days, I tried to forget what had happened, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those dark, empty eyes. Until one day, I decided to tell my friend Jorge, another truck driver. He looked at me seriously and said, "You saw the bride of BR 163. I widened my eyes. "What do you mean?" He sighed, lit a cigarette, and began to explain. According to the legend that circulates among truckers years ago, a young woman was on her way to her own wedding on that highway. Her fiancé was waiting for her in Santarem, but the car she was in suffered a fatal accident. Since then, they say she appears by the roadside, waiting for someone to take her to the destination she never reached. Some say that if you stop and offer her a ride, she vanishes before getting into the truck. Others say that if you ignore her, she appears inside the cab.
just like she did to you," Jorge said, blowing smoke to the side. I swallowed hard. What I saw wasn't exhaustion. It wasn't my imagination. That woman was real, and worse. Maybe she still is. Today, every time I cross that highway, I avoid looking at the roadside. I know that if I stare too long, I might see her again. But never again. Never again will I travel alone through that stretch of road. Not every nightmare happens while you sleep. If you've made it this far, it means you love a good scary story. So go ahead and hit the like button to spread the fear, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any chilling tales, and turn on notifications. And tell me in the comments, what's the scariest experience you've ever had? Maybe your story will be featured here. My name is Renato, and I've been a truck driver for over 20 years. I've always loved the road, the freedom of driving for hours on end, watching landscapes change while the radio plays songs that keep me awake. But not all trips are smooth. Some leave marks that never fade. This happened on a cold June morning. I was transporting a load of household appliances from Paraná to the countryside of São Paulo. The road was deserted, and the thick fog made everything even quieter and more isolated. Anyone who drives at night knows there's a moment when exhaustion blends with silence, creating a kind of dangerous torpor. It was in that state that I started seeing the lights in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was another truck approaching. But something was strange. The lights were there, fixed, never actually getting closer. I looked again and realized they weren't normal headlights. They were too dim, like flickering candles in the dark. I blinked a few times, trying to shake off the sleep. I looked at the road ahead, then back at the mirror. The lights were still there, but now they seemed closer. My chest felt heavy. A chill ran down my spine. I decided to speed up a little, hoping to overtake them and see what they were. But nothing happened. They remained at the same distance as if they were following me. That's when I felt a sudden cold inside the cabin. I glanced at the dashboard. The temperature had dropped almost 5 degrees in just a few minutes. My truck never had air conditioning issues, and I didn't even have it on. At that moment, a strange smell invaded the cabin. It was a burnt odor, but not from the road or the cargo. It was a strong smell of burned flesh. I covered my nose with one hand and tried to focus on the road. The fog seemed denser by the second. Suddenly, I heard a noise coming from the passenger seat. A creak, as if someone had shifted their weight. My heart pounded. I was alone. Slowly, without wanting to turn my head completely, I moved only my eyes to the side. There was someone sitting there. It was a thin man with grayish skin and empty eyes. He wore old, charred-looking clothes. His face was partially burned, the exposed flesh giving a macabre touch to what remained of his expression. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Desperation took hold of me. I gripped the steering wheel tightly and tried to control my breathing. He was staring at me, motionless. Every hair on my body stood on end. Then he whispered, with a weak voice, like an old radio tuned to the wrong frequency. "Stop at the next station, or you won't reach your destination." My blood ran cold. I kept driving, not daring to look again. The road seemed endless, and the fog even thicker. Minutes later, I saw a gas station ahead. I didn't think twice. I slowed down and pulled the truck over. As soon as I stopped, I looked at the passenger seat. It was empty. I quickly got out of the truck,
taking deep breaths, trying to understand what the hell had just happened. The gas station attendant came over and asked if I needed anything. I decided to ask something that was eating me up inside. Has anything strange ever happened around here? The man looked at me for a moment and then pointed to an old, rusted billboard. I walked over and saw the newspaper headline pasted on it. Truck driver dies burned after accident in the mountains. Brakes failed and the vehicle overturned at the curve. The photo next to the headline showed a truck identical to mine, or rather, to my truck's older model. And in the image of the driver, a chill ran through my body. It was the man I had seen sitting beside me. That night, I slept at the station. When dawn broke, I left, my stomach churning and the feeling that someone had just saved me from something terrible. Since then, I've never ignored the warnings of the road, and every time I see lights in the rearview mirror at night, I wonder if they're just headlights, or if someone is trying to warn me again. Remember, not every nightmare happens while you sleep. If you're enjoying these chilling stories, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps spread the fear. If you're not part of our dark community yet, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale. And tell me in the comments, what's the scariest moment of your life? Maybe it will become our next story. I've transported all kinds of cargo in my life. Sealed boxes, heavy machinery, even live loads like cattle and poultry. But that night's trip was different, not because of the destination or the route, but because of what was inside my trailer. Or rather, what shouldn't have been there. I got the call late in the afternoon. The client was one of those discreet types, firm voice, straight to the point. No questions, just orders. Pick up the load from a remote warehouse and deliver it to a designated location. Payment up front, twice the usual rate. The only requirement, do not open the trailer under any circumstances. That wasn't unusual. Companies transport confidential products all the time, but something about this one felt off from the start. When I arrived at the warehouse, the men loading the truck avoided eye contact. They moved fast, almost anxious, and didn't exchange a single word. The trailer was locked with a heavy-duty padlock. One of the men handed me an envelope with final instructions and a phone number for emergencies. Before leaving, I asked, "What am I carrying?" The man hesitated. Then he answered, "Just drive. Don't stop. Don't open it." That response made me swallow hard. But money is money. I started the engine and hit the road. The night was dark, moonless. The highway felt emptier than usual. The only company was my headlights illuminating the asphalt and the constant hum of the engine. Normally, I enjoy the solitude of the road, but that night the silence was oppressive. I drove for hours without issues, but then it started. At first I heard a noise, faint, muffled, like something dragging inside the trailer. The load was secured, properly fastened. There was no way anything was moving in there. I sped up, trying to ignore it. Maybe it was my imagination. But the sound grew louder, scratching, then banging, like something was trying to get out. My heart raced. I glanced at the rearview mirror, but all I saw was darkness behind the truck. The noise became more insistent. A loud thud made the truck shudder, as if something massive had thrown itself against the trailer wall. My stomach churned. I grabbed the phone and dialed the number from the envelope. It rang 3 times before someone answered. The voice on the other end didn't ask who I was. They just said, "Don't stop. Don't open it. Just keep driving." Before I could argue, they hung up. I kept going, but the noise only got worse. Now there was something else. Voices, low, whispering. They sounded distant, but they were clearly coming from inside the trailer. The radio crackled and turned off by itself. The dashboard lights flickered for a moment, and a wave of cold filled the cabin. Even with the engine running hot, I felt the chill seep into my skin. Then I smelled it. Iron. Blood. My eyes watered, and every hair on my body stood on end. I gripped the wheel tightly, just a few more hours to the destination, but with every mile the feeling got worse, and then I saw it. In the rearview mirror, a dark figure stood beside the trailer. My blood turned to ice. There was no way someone could be there. I was doing over 80. I blinked. The figure was gone, but I knew it was still with me. The truck started losing power. The engine coughed, sputtered. The lights flickered. The trailer shook as if something was about to burst through the door. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to see what I was carrying. I pulled over on a deserted stretch of road. Jumping out of the cabin, I immediately sensed something was wrong. The air felt heavier, like I was in a sealed room. The smell of blood was overwhelming. The key to the padlock trembled in my hand. I unlocked it and pulled the door open. The trailer was empty. No boxes, no crates, nothing. Just dark stains smeared across the floor and walls of the metal interior, like deep claw marks. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. Something was watching me. I could feel it. The radio crackled inside the cabin, and then the voice came. Not from the radio, not from the phone, but from inside the trailer. "You shouldn't have stopped." My body froze. A freezing wind blew from within the trailer, and for a second I saw shadows writhing in the darkness, human-like forms trapped in something beyond this world. Their mouths open in silent screams. And then everything stopped. The trailer was empty again. I slammed the door shut, locking the padlock without a second thought. I jumped into the truck, started the engine, and sped off without looking back. The road seemed longer. Dawn took forever to arrive. When I finally reached the drop-off point, the same man from before was already waiting. His face was pale, eyes sunken. Without a word, he took the keys to the padlock and opened the trailer. He looked inside for a few seconds, then closed it again. He handed me an envelope with the rest of the payment and spoke, his voice sounding more exhausted than anything else. "Did you see?" I swallowed hard, but didn't answer. He sighed and said one last thing before turning his back and vanishing into the morning light. "Just don't take this kind of job again. Since then, I've refused any cargo I can't see. Easy money isn't worth the cost of carrying the unknown, because some loads should never be transported." My name is Ethan. I live in Portland, Oregon, and work as a freelance video editor. The solitary routine has always been something I appreciated. No annoying coworkers, no endless meetings. Just me, my computer, and my creativity. Everything changed the day I moved into this apartment. It was a small but cozy studio. I was excited when I found it, especially for the affordable price and quiet location. The first month went well. I worked during the day and watched movies at night. However, it was after the second week that something strange started happening. Have you ever had the feeling that you're being watched? The feeling started subtly. First,
Small things moved out of place. My remote control, which I always left on the coffee table, appeared on the kitchen counter. My mouse changed position overnight. Small things, easy to ignore. I convinced myself it was just my own absent-mindedness. Until the first recording. One night, I woke up to a strange sound coming from my living room. Something like a whisper. My heart raced, and I lay there for a while trying to understand if it was just in my head. I grabbed my phone and checked the security cameras I had installed in the apartment just in case. Nothing. Everything seemed normal. However, when I reviewed the recordings the next day, I noticed something strange. At 3:17 a.m., the screen went black for a few seconds. When the image returned, my office chair, which had been pushed against the desk, was a few inches back, as if someone had sat there. But I live alone. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to rationalize it. A glitch in the recording? Maybe a system bug? I spent the day trying to forget, but at night, I had trouble sleeping. Around 3 a.m., I heard the whisper again. This time, it sounded like my own name. Ethan. I jumped out of bed and turned on all the lights in the apartment. My stomach turned when I saw the bathroom door slightly ajar. I distinctly remembered closing it before going to sleep. I walked toward it, each step heavy with fear. When I slowly pushed the door open, expecting to find some logical explanation, all I saw was the mirror. And what I saw in it made my blood run cold. The door behind me was open, revealing a dark silhouette standing at the entrance to my bedroom. I turned instantly, but there was nothing there. Just my ragged breathing filling the silence. I ran to my computer and reviewed the most recent recording. The video showed something that filled me with absolute terror. For a brief moment, at the exact time the screen went dark, a face appeared reflected in the mirror. My face. But it wasn't me. The eyes were sunken, the smile too wide, and it was staring directly at the camera. I turned off the computer and left the apartment that same night. I never went back. I never tried to understand. I rented another place and left all my things behind. Even today, when I pass near that neighborhood, I feel something watching me. As if that reflection still follows me. As if it's waiting for me to return. Have you ever felt like something is watching you when you're alone? If you ever do, run. My name is Daniel. I am a writer, and a few months ago I rented an isolated house by a lake in Minnesota to finish my book. The idea of being alone, far from the city, had always appealed to me. The sound of the water, the wind through the trees, the absolute tranquility. Everything seemed perfect. Until that night. It was late, and I was finishing a chapter when I heard the knocks on the door. 3 firm knocks. The sound echoed through the empty house, making my chest tighten. I looked out the window, expecting to see a lost neighbor, but there was only darkness and the reflection of the moon on the lake. I cautiously opened the door. It was an elderly woman. She wore a worn-out dress and a faded blue scarf wrapped around her neck. Her face was wrinkled, but her eyes were intense. There was something strange about her, something I couldn't quite define. "Good evening," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "May I come in?" I hesitated. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere. Something about her deeply unsettled me. "Do you need help?" I asked, keeping my hand on the door, ready to close it. "Yes, I used to live here," she replied, gazing into the house. "May I come in, just for a moment? I'd like to see how it looks now." My skin crawled. I knew that this house had belonged to a family for many years, but according to the owner, the previous residents had moved to another state. So who was this woman? I don't think that would be a good idea, I began to say, but she took a step forward. There is something you need to know about this place. Something we left behind. Something that may still be here. My heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at me to shut the door in her face. But before I could, she said something that completely paralyzed me. Daniel, please, you don't want to end up like him. I had not told her my name. My breath caught in my throat. How did she know my name? I stepped back, ready to lock the door. But then I saw it. Her gaze was fixed on something behind me. I turned slowly. In the reflection of the window, there was another figure inside the house. A dark silhouette, standing in the corner of the room. A figure that hadn't been there before. When I looked back at the door, the woman was gone. The night was silent, as if nothing had happened. But I knew I was no longer alone. My name is Lucas, and I have never been a man of many fears. I spent most of my life seeking solitude, believing that isolation was a refuge, a way to reconnect with my own essence. That's why I accepted the offer to take care of a decommissioned observatory in a remote region of Alaska. 3 months alone, surrounded only by the cold, the vast white of the snow, and the starry sky. I was eager for this peace. The observatory was perched on a cliff, offering a breathtaking view of the frozen ocean. The building was old but functional. A generator provided electricity, and the supplies were enough for the entire winter. I had a small room, a communication room with an old radio, and an observation tower with a gigantic telescopic lens pointed at the cosmos. Everything seemed perfect. For the first few days, I adapted well. I explored the surroundings during the day and spent hours at night observing the stars. I slept little, but it was a peaceful sleep. At least until things changed. The first thing I noticed was the sound. On the third night, when everything was silent and only the wind howled outside, I heard something coming from the cliff. It sounded like a distant murmur, too low to distinguish words. I walked up to the tower and looked through the telescope, scanning the darkness. Nothing but the frozen landscape. I stayed there for a while, trying to understand what could have caused that noise. In the end, I convinced myself it was just ice cracking in the distance. The next night, I heard it again. This time, it was louder. It seemed closer. And there was a pattern, as if it were words whispered into the wind. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but the presence of that sound unsettled me in an inexplicable way. I decided to record it with my digital recorder, and the next day, I tried listening again. The recording captured only the wind, but I knew what I had heard. On the 5th day, something changed. I woke up with the feeling that I was not alone. The sound was closer than ever, as if it was right outside. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the entrance, opening the door just a crack. The icy wind slashed against my skin, but there was nothing outside, or rather, almost nothing. Footprints in the snow. They came from the cliff and stopped right at my door. I felt my body tense, as if every instinct was screaming at me to lock everything and pretend nothing had happened. But my curiosity was stronger. I followed the footprints for a few meters, but they simply vanished into nothing, as if the person had evaporated into the darkness. I went back inside and locked all the doors. From that night on, I started noticing something even worse. reflections. Passing by the bathroom mirror, I saw something that made my blood freeze. For an instant, it wasn't my reflection staring back at me. It was something that looked like me, but the eyes were wrong. Deep, empty. The face was too pale. I blinked and everything went back to normal. I couldn't sleep that night. The following nights were worse. Now I saw the figure in the glass of the observation tower, reflected against the starry night. Always in the corner of my vision, always just out of focus. My own reflection watching me back, with an almost imperceptible smile. On the 10th night, I heard footsteps inside the observatory. I ran to my bedroom door and held the lock with all my strength, my heart pounding against my ribs. The sound stopped outside. Absolute silence. But I knew there was something on the other side, waiting for me. The next day, I did what anyone would do. I turned on the radio and called for help. The response came through full of static. No team can reach you until next week. Hold on. 7 days. I couldn't leave. And each night, the reflection became clearer, more real. I avoided mirrors, avoided any reflective surface. But I knew it was there, waiting. On the 15th night, I couldn't resist. I went up to the tower and looked through the glass. There was no reflection. Behind me, a low chuckle. The next moment, everything went dark. I woke up in the snow. The observatory doors were open, empty. I was outside, with no memory of how I got there. But one thing was different. The glass reflected an image. But it was no longer me. And from inside the observatory, I could see my own silhouette staring out. My name is Gabriel, and for reasons I may never fully explain, I was the only one to make it out of that cabin alive. I work as a university professor and have always been a firm skeptic. Things like ghosts, curses, and supernatural presences were nothing more than unfounded legends to me, at least until that winter. It was my friend Helena who organized the trip. She, Marcos, Daniel, and I rented a secluded cabin in the Colorado mountains to spend a week away from the chaos of the city. It seemed perfect. Snow, a fireplace, drinks, and good conversation. The kind of retreat we all needed. The drive to the cabin was peaceful. When we arrived, everything seemed fine, though the place had an air of abandonment. Helena joked that the cabin looked like the setting of a horror movie. We laughed and went inside. The first night was normal. We cooked together, drank wine, and played cards. But by the second night, something strange happened. I was up late reading in the living room when I heard footsteps upstairs. I assumed it was Marcos or Daniel going to the bathroom. However, when I looked toward the staircase, I saw something strange. Daniel's bedroom door was slightly open, and he was inside, fast asleep. In the other room, Helena and Marcos were also in bed. So who was walking upstairs? A chill ran down my spine. I closed my book and walked to the stairs. The footsteps continued. Slow, deliberate, as if someone was pacing the hallway. I climbed the stairs cautiously, my heart pounding. When I reached the top, everything was silent. The footsteps had stopped. I looked around, but there was nothing except the dim light and the cold wind slipping through a half-open window at the end of the hall. I was about to close the window when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. There were footprints in the dust on the floor. Footprints that did not belong to any of us. Footprints that ended right behind me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. I went back to my room, trying to rationalize. Maybe the cabin's owner had been here recently. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I wanted to believe that. The next morning, I told everyone what had happened. Daniel laughed and said I was just getting spooked by the cabin's atmosphere. Helena, on the other hand, seemed unsettled. She said she had also heard strange noises the night before. We decided to ignore it, but on the fourth night, things got much worse. We were in the living room, drinking and talking, when the front door of the cabin swung open by itself. The freezing wind sliced through the room. We rushed to close it, but Helena pointed at something outside. Someone was standing near the closest tree. A tall, motionless silhouette. Marcos grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the figure, but before the light could reach it, it was gone. That was enough. We decided to leave first thing in the morning, but we never got the chance. That final night, I woke up to a horrible sound. A muffled scream coming from Helena's room. I ran to her door, but it was locked. Marcos and Daniel were already there, pounding and calling her name. We broke the door open. Helena was gone. Her window was open, and outside the snow was disturbed as if something had dragged her into the forest. Footprints, but not just hers. There were larger footprints, many of them. Daniel ran to grab the car keys, but he couldn't get the cabin door to open. Something had locked it from the outside. The radio wasn't working. We were trapped. And then we heard the footsteps again. This time, they weren't coming from upstairs. They were coming from the roof. I don't know how we made it through that night. The footsteps continued for hours, moving back and forth. Occasionally, we heard something like deep, heavy breathing. Something was hunting us. When the sun rose, the car was unlocked. Helena was never found. The police searched for days but found no clues, no signs of forced entry, no footprints beyond what we had seen that night. Just snow and silence. I never went back to that cabin, but sometimes in the middle of the night, I still hear those footsteps. My name is Kayo, and for a long time I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Now, after everything that happened, I'm no longer sure what's real and what isn't. It all started on an ordinary night, coming home from work. I lived alone and depended on the subway to get around. I took the same line every day, and I already knew every station, every sound, and every familiar face in the train cars. But that night, something was different. The subway was eerily empty. It wasn't unusual to find a nearly vacant car late at night, but this time I was the only passenger. The lights flickered occasionally, and the air felt much colder than usual. I ignored the uncomfortable feeling and kept scrolling through my phone. But when I looked at the window, something made me freeze. We passed through a station I didn't recognize. The name on the sign was worn out, as if no one had used it for years. The worst part was that I was certain this station didn't exist on this route. The train didn't stop, but for a brief moment, I saw silhouettes on the platform. People in old-fashioned clothing, standing still, staring at the car, staring at me. My heart pounded. I quickly turned my head away, trying to convince myself it was just exhaustion. But when I looked forward, I nearly screamed. At the far end of the car, there was a man who hadn't been there before. He wore a worn-out black suit, and his face was cadaverous, pale as wax. His gaze was locked onto me, but his eyes were hollow, impossibly dark. They looked like empty voids. I swallowed hard and looked away. I pressed the stop request button, but nothing happened. No response. No voice announcing the next station. I was trapped. The next station was even stranger. moldy walls, dim lighting, and distorted graffiti. The train slowed down. This time I saw it clearly. The people on the platform weren't just standing still, they were moving toward me. I jumped to my feet, ready to run, but where to? The man in the suit was still there, closer than before, the car filled with the scent of damp earth and rusted iron. The station vanished as the train moved on. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. When I opened them, the man was gone, and I finally recognized the next station, my stop. I rushed out of the car as fast as I could and looked back. The train looked normal, ordinary passengers, nothing out of place. That nightmare was over, or so I thought. The next day, as I entered the subway station, I glanced at the tracks before stepping onto the escalator. There, in the shadows, were the hollow eyes of the man in the suit, watching me, waiting. And I knew I would never take that trip alone again.